when are you guys going to do the Eagle?
Hey, how about an F-15 episode?
Why haven't you done the Eagle yet?
Come on, do the F-15 already.
A fighter pilot podcast and no F-15 episode? Ah!
Come on.
Bogies now. 25644. 210 for 5 miles.
300 knots.
Okay, he's got about 50 to go with his nose.
Okay.
You've been asking for it. Well, you got it. Here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast, it's F-15 month. Every episode for the month of March is dedicated to this world-class fighter. Is it old? Yeah. Is it lethal? Oh, yeah. And now, the man who's never flown the F-15, your host, Vincent Aiello.
Hello, everyone. I am your host, Jello, and welcome to what we're calling F-15 month. It's the same format and schedule you're used to, but every episode for the month of March will feature the once McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing F-15 Eagle and Strike Eagle. Now, I certainly don't want to try to tackle this alone, so here to help out as guest co-host is episode 25 hero, Mike Walsh. BS, long time no see, dude.
Hey, Jello, great to be back, man, on the pod. And I haven't been back in SoCal since I left, so it's been great to be back.
No doubt. Yeah. Well, it's good to have you back in SoCal. So, all right, let's see. It's been a long time since we've seen you. After your episode on the U.S. Navy Flight School aired in September 2018, I think we had you back for a quick Facebook Live listener question and answer session. And then you were wrapping up your active duty time with the Marine Corps. What's new since then?
Basically, a couple months after that, so in about December of 18, I called it quits with the Marines, and after about 14 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah, decent run with those guys, had a blast, loved it. And then I jumped over to the National Guard, flying F-15Cs now.
Okay, that's got to be quite the transition, and of course, that's why we're glad to have you back, because how many hours did you end up with in the Hornet?
Oh, I think I had close to about 1,300.
Okay. And what have you got in the Eagle now?
And I have about barely 150.
Well, that makes you the expert.
Yeah, a little bit different.
Okay. Well, yeah, the guests for today's show have just a few more hours in the Eagle.
Yep, a little bit.
I think this will really be interesting, though, because we'll be able to use your expertise, I'll say, in the F-18 and compare it to the F-15. And truthfully, that's kind of selfish for me because I know the F-18 so well and don't know the F-15 as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. We'll get to all that in just a little bit, but first, how about some quick announcements? Well, our newest Facebook group for aspiring military aviators has been doing so well that we spun off a version just for our Australian friends. So if you happen to someday hope to fly for the Royal Australian Air Force or Air Defense Forces down there, check out the Aussie Pit by the Fighter Pilot Podcast. That's on Facebook, where you can collaborate with others who share similar goals. Some are farther along in the process. Others might just be getting going. But jump in there and help out or get help if that's what you need. Also on the shop page on our website, we've always featured various books we think you may enjoy. And now we're happy to announce we have book reviews for the ones I've personally read. Now, I'm far from a professional book reviewer, so I simply offer some thoughts on the book and how I enjoyed it. Check that out at fighterpilotpodcast.com/shop. And as mentioned on the last episode, a couple BVR Productions teammates and I will be at the Naval Air Facility El Centro Air Show in the Imperial Valley of Southern California on Saturday, March 14th, 2020. Now, as we record this BS, the airshow coordinators have not yet released a list of aircraft on static display. So instead of saying I'll be under a certain aircraft at a certain time, again, just look for us strolling around in our FPP attire and be sure to stop us and say hello if you happen to be there. Again, that's Saturday, March 14th, 2020. Now, another thing is I've been invited to give a speech to a club in London at the end of March, and I will be there on the 31st for that, arriving a couple days before and a couple days after. So if you are a listener in the London area and you would like to meet up, I have not yet set a place or time, but we're looking to try to do that. Hit us up on email. Let us know if you're interested, and we'll try to get some information out for everybody as well. If you recommend someone to be interviewed for the show, if you or yourself would like to be, let me know. And while I'm there, maybe we can meet up and get a few more future episodes out. All right, BS, you game for a couple listener questions before we get to the F-15 interview?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, why don't we start with a phone call this week?
Hello, sir. My name is Vincent Rawls, and I am an enlisted sailor in the United States Navy currently. I actually just graduated high school back in June. so I have the initial 4-year contract. My question is, because I've always wanted to be a fighter pilot, I happen to pick a rate that's not really involved with aviation, though. But how many previous enlisted fighter pilots do you know of is the question I have. Because by the time I get out, I'll be around 22, and I'll be trying to still fit in that window of time to be able to achieve my goals. That's my question. How doable is it for me to achieve my dream? Thank you. Love the show.
All right. Thank you, Vincent from Detroit. BS, do you know any prior enlisted who turned into fighter pilots?
I know quite a few guys that actually did that in across services, which is kind of cool. So from the Marine side, one of my really good friends who I joined the Black Knights with years ago was prior enlisted crew chief on, I think it was CH-53s. And then he went through what was the MESEP program, essentially submitted a standard kind of package to be selected, was selected, went to officer candidate school, and then just went through, got his commission, and then went through flight school just like anyone else out of college or whatever else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marine Enlisted Commissioning Program. And I met a couple of those guys back in November when I had a chance to go to my alma mater, UCLA, and give a speech for those folks. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I know one as well. In fact, he was on the show. I know several. I just can only think of one right off the top of my head. That's Josh Larson. He was on episode 8 on aircraft nomenclature. Did you find, just out of curiosity, with your experiences with those guys, did they either have more maturity, or were they looked up to any differently from the enlisted because they had been one of them? I mean, how did they do, would you say? How effective were they as pilots?
I think they're extremely effective. I know in the Guard, for example, I mean, right now we have, I want to say 6 guys that currently in our unit.
Wow.
They used to be crew chiefs, which was essentially a plane captain in the Navy Marine Corps. So they were crew chiefs. They submitted their package to the board, got selected, went through pilot training, and now they're flying Eagles. And all their really good friends that they were crew chiefs with, most of them are still crew chiefs in the squadron. So when we walk out to the jets and get ready to go, I mean, you can just see guys' faces light up because they look, and that's their buddy that, years ago they were, fixing jets and turning wrenches and stuff. And now they're the ones that are pulling the handles and, getting a blast off in an Eagle.
Right.
And our unit specifically is really good about cultivating internally. So we're always encouraging these guys to, submit and try to strive to become a pilot if that's what they want to do. So, and they were great because they just bring a great perspective that I don't have. I'm not enlisted, so I just don't have that. They do, and it really just makes the unit much more close-knit.
Yeah, I agree with that from what I've seen anecdotally. And I would say to your question again, Vincent Rawls, it's not, I would say, numerically the most common, but it's not impossible. And certainly guys are doing it and doing it well. All right, next, let's take an email. Jeff Hansen asks, as a former fighter pilot, I assume he's addressing this to me since you still are, BS, can you address what the fighter pilot of 2030 wants for the 6th generation planes? What would be a pilot's wish list for such a platform to be able to achieve air supremacy? Now, you've flown the Hornet and the Eagle, so I think you're kind of uniquely able to answer this. What do you think there, BS?
I think we're kind of seeing this happen a little bit already with the F-35 and kind of some 5th gen or even beyond that. So for 6th gen stuff, this is just totally me speculating, but probably a platform that can talk to all other platforms, because currently some can and some can't, and it gets kind of interesting and some frustrating. But what I mean by that is a jet that can talk to ground units, that could talk to ships, that could talk to other jets, airborne, and just distribute that information. I think is going to be humongous in the next decade or two. Other than that, I think, just enhancing the sensors that are already on a lot of the airplanes and other systems that we have now, just taking that to the next level and just really getting that information out to the people who need it in a time-sensitive manner. I think that's going to be key.
No, I totally agree. As I thought about this question, I summed that up as global essay.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ability to just know what everything is everywhere and who is with you or not, where the adversaries are. And yeah, I think that's going to be important. I still think that superior performance is relevant because in a denied environment of some sort, you could find yourself at emerge. And that's certainly lessons we learned the hard way in Vietnam. So I think that's still relevant, as well as endurance, which again, trade-off, but it'd be nice to be able to stay up for a long time. And I think long-range weapons would also be good, or the ability to support someone else's long-range weapons, whether it's a drone wingman or something else. It's hard to know what the future will hold. And It's kind of like I read that Steve Jobs said, people think they want this, but what they really want is what ended up being, I think, the iPod or the iPhone.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So there's probably people out there, or right? Didn't someone ask Henry Ford, or if you asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, but he came up with a car. So I hope that there are people out there smarter than me, at least, who are coming up with something that I don't even know I want yet, but hopefully when we see it, at least I'll be out of the picture. But BS, maybe you can go out and
we'll
tear
see.
it up.
Maybe my son will.
There you go.
The performance piece, I think you nailed it there, Jello. And we kind of saw this in Vietnam, right? We all thought the Sparrow missile was going to end within visual range engagements, and that was clearly false. And that's even more true today. Like that's going to happen in a large scale engagement. You simply cannot bring a bus into a racetrack environment, right? I mean, it's just not going to win.
That's
so
right.
if you can see people from range and you can distribute information, that's great. But if someone sneaks through and starts to tangle it up, you don't have an aircraft that can do that. That's not going to go well for you. So
that's right. All right, next, let's take another phone call.
Hey, Vincent. This is AB calling from Fort Worth, Texas. Quick question. With the replacement of the C2 Greyhounds coming here with the DMV-22s, what is to happen with all the E2 Hawkeyes? I'm sure maybe you've mentioned it before, someone's mentioned it, but I don't think I was necessarily listening to that part. But yeah, that's my question. Love the show, and hopefully soon I'll join the fleet. Appreciate it. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, I listened to this a couple times. I think he said AV, but I'm not totally sure. But at any rate, thanks for your call. And AV, just because the E2 and the C2 share similar lines and kind of came from the same family, if you will, doesn't mean that the E2 is going away just because the C2 is. In fact, the E2D Advanced Hawkeye is in development and should soon bring much better capability to the fleet. And that will be, I think, around for a long time. So we hope to eventually have an episode on the E2 as well as most any military aircraft. So we'll look for that soon. That's one of those certainly where we would want a pilot and an NFO to talk about that one. So we may do that. All right. BS, this last one's right up your alley. This is from Jeremy from Indianapolis, who asks, how does a pilot transition from one airframe to another, i.e. from an A-10 to an F-16, or in your case, from an F-18 to an F-15, BS? Do pilots get to choose when and to which aircraft, or is it based on the needs of the service? Are pilots given, pardon the expression, a crash course in the new type? Is the training more in depth? And lastly, do the pilots maintain their qualifications in their original aircraft? So BS, a lot of questions there. Let's start at the beginning. How is it decided who goes where? In your case, it was somewhat a personal choice, but also they had to accept you, right?
That's right. Yeah, it really depends. For example, in the Marine Corps, at least, the F-35 is currently being phased in. So people can actually submit their application to transition to the F-35. And if they get selected, off they go into training and become an F-35 pilot. So kind of similar to what I did in the Guard, where I wanted to fly the Eagle. I submitted an application. I went and interviewed and did all that process. I got selected. Now I'm flying the Eagle. But there is other side to that, where I know in the past where a backseater, for example, in Nfo could submit to become a pilot, and they don't really necessarily know what they're going to end up flying. So they stop being a backseater. They start at day zero at pilot training down in flight school in Pensacola. And they just kind of put their hat in the ring, just like everybody else did back in the day. And that could be a needs of the service type thing. I have seen, though, if you were a backseater, a Hornet backseater, for example, I can't think of too many guys that didn't go Hornets. I think that's what they wanted. So I think they kind of try to make it work for you. I guess the answer is it depends. It depends on where you're looking to go, who you're looking to do it with, because there's a whole lot of programs out there to facilitate that transition.
Yeah, no doubt. And in some cases, your squadron might transition, right? So there could be Marine squadrons transitioning to the F-35B or C, for that matter, right now. And if you're in that squadron, then you go through that. And then the second part is the crash course. Obviously, I think it depends on the difference between aircraft and how much you go through. I was recently a guest on our first episode of our sister podcast, Air Combat Sim, where we talked about the different FRS syllabi, and BS, you're intimately familiar as the former VMFAT 101 OPSO, but you could have a Cat 1 for a brand new winged pilot, a Cat 2 for someone who flew something else but needs all that similar training, but he's not brand new, and then a Cat 3 is someone who's been out of the cockpit for a while, and then a Cat 4 is someone who maybe is just, like in my case, I was current in the F-18 Hornet, but I got a Cat 4 in the Super Hornet. It was very quick, like a week or two, just a few hours, and some differences, lectures. In your case, what did you go through when you transitioned to the F-15?
So when we went to the Eagle, I did what was called a TX, as a transition program. And similar to kind of what we do with the categories, Cat 1 through 5, there's this certain kind of regime within the TX. TX1, vice all the way down, could be something from a quick, like you did, Super Hornet transition that could last a week or two. There was guys up there that had plenty of Eagle experience. I just needed a quick top off and kind of break the rust off and get back in the game. And that was about 2 weeks. For me, they actually made a new track for former Navy, Marine, or real experienced fighter pilots transitioning to the Eagle that was very simulator heavy, but fairly light on flights. And I think I got 25 hours in the thing total in training, which if you think about it, I want to say that, you know, a new F-18 student probably walks out of there with close to 100 hours, I would think. And here I am, you know, I'm experienced and everything. I've never flown an Eagle before. And my third flight, you know, I'm like a solo check ride. And it's kind of nerve wracking because you know how to fly a certain type of aircraft, but maybe not this one. And it kind of feels the same and it smells the same, but it's a lot bigger and it's got more power. And you're like, oh my God, this is not a Hornet. This is an Eagle. I don't know if I should be doing this after 4 hours in the thing, but I think what they ended up settling on is a really good syllabus that really leverages on guys' experience. And for the guy, I think at this point, there's maybe close to about a dozen or so Navy Marine guys that I can think of. And there's other Air Force guys that do it as well, that have done the program that I did. And I think it works pretty well. It's a good compromise between getting guys through the training effectively so they can get back to the squadron. But, you know, make sure we know what we're doing and we're properly trained so we don't go out there and do something crazy.
And again, at that point, you had roughly 1,300 hours in the F-18 alone, let alone flight school. So you weren't a newbie, and they would not do that, obviously, with a brand new pilot. So I forgot the Cat 5. Is that just a guy who needs to go back to the boat?
I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very quick. Maybe a week or so flying, maybe a quick NATOPS check just to kind of...
So if you were coming off a shore tour and you were already current, you just need to go back to the boat. All right, fair enough. And then his last question was, do pilots still maintain their qualifications in their original aircraft? Once again, our favorite answer, it depends. So when I learned the F-16 at then NSOC, now Nautic, I learned that, but I did not give up my F-18 quals. So I actually had 3 for 1 there. BS, I assume, even though you probably feel like you could jump back in a Hornet, you don't have any F-18s near you. There's no reason for you to maintain an F-18 qual.
There is no reason, no. And I started back from scratch as a wingman in the Eagle. I'm still a wingman right now. So hopefully we'll in the near future, we'll start doing some quals and getting back in the game and being more productive for the squadron. But it was interesting going from, you know, you're a weapons officer of the Marine Hornet training squadron, get a lot of responsibility, you know, a lot of people looking for you to give them the guidance, you know, and especially tactically. And now it's the other way around when I'm the new guy and I'm asking all the questions because, you know, I walk into a squadron full of guys that have been flying the Eagle for a long time and they're really good at it. It's been kind of a neat dynamic to do that, but it's definitely, you start from scratch. And
Well, and I hope they still give you the respect due for your other experiences, and you're probably smart enough to not pretend like you know everything about it with with those guys. But and you offer, I think, a fresh perspective too, because you can say, well, in the F-18 it works like this, and so I wonder why it's different. Anyway, we're going to get to all that here after we listen to our interview in just a little bit. Speaking of that, we can pretty much transition to it now. Any thoughts? I mean, you had a chance to listen. Any thoughts before we get to the interview?
Yeah, I listened to the interview. I really hope the listeners enjoy it. I mean, you got a couple of legends, and absolute legends in the Eagle community here. I mean, I want to say cumulative orders are like 8,000 hours.
A little over 72 or something like that, 75.
Yeah, with some great experience. So I really think that people are going to listen to this and love it. So.
Oh, for sure. Well, on that note, the one thing we didn't talk about when we talked about variants was the different lots and blocks. Now, I guess in the F-18 world, you flew all the different lots, but you said you're flying the F-15C now. Are there different blocks there?
There are, yeah. Most of our jets, believe it or not, are from the late 70s, early 80s. So it's kind of interesting when on the tail of an Eagle, it'll say something like 80-123 or whatever. And the first two of the year that the jet came out. So
1980 in that
Yeah,
example.
1980 in that case.
Right.
And so it's kind of neat to see that.
So you've got some older ones, but I'm sure they're still good ones, huh?
I mean, the first time I showed up to my unit, we were just kind of walking the flight line, just kicking the tires and seeing it. I mean, I think there was like 12 Eagles on the line. And I mean, these things looked like they were just like, we just got them off the line like 3 days ago, which is a testament. Our people take incredible care of our airplanes. And
not to take away from that, but it probably helps also that they never have to go out to the boat.
They don't have to go to the boat. They don't operate in salt water. And it's the Air Force, right? So their airplanes are their main effort, right? Which is a different kind of mentality than you get in the Navy Marine Corps side. It's just the way they where they allocate and basically where they prioritize their funds.
For sure. Different. All right, well, why don't we get straight to the interview?
Great.
All right, the Fighter Pilot Podcast is back in Las Vegas, third time in as many months. And back in the room with me is Terry Scott. Stretch, how the heck are you, buddy?
And Jello, I'm good. I'm good. How about you?
I'm going to have to start paying you. I'm good. You're like coming and helping.
I'll take the money.
Yeah?
I'll take the money.
Well, how about a refreshment instead?
Okay.
All right.
One IPA for everybody.
That's right.
It's good.
No, there's more, actually. Anyway, well, dude, I am excited about this for a couple reasons. Number one, people have been asking for an aircraft episode on this particular aircraft for a long, long time. But number two, there's like over 7,000 hours in the F-15 sitting in the room.
Well, as a matter of fact, there is.
That is amazing. So do me a favor. Why don't you introduce our guest tonight and your good friend?
Yeah, Brian Spiderman Kamp. We've been friends for probably 20-some years. We've both flown the Eagle for a long time, and Spiderman is the most current in the Eagle.
All right. Compared to you, you mean?
Yeah, compared to me.
Yeah.
So I had about 3,500 hours in the Eagle, and Spiderman's got well over 4,000 in the Eagle. So a great breadth of experience.
Spidey, welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, thank you. So proud to be here. It's an honor to be here with you. Stretch, my buddy,
you 22
plus years, and definitely to be here for your audience and answer their questions. So glad to be part of this experience.
All right.
Spider-Man got me through weapon school.
Yeah? All right. Well, you are a retired colonel in the Air National Guard.
True.
Okay. And I think you said before we rolled about 4,200 hours in the
About
F-15?
4,200 hours. The interesting part in the Eagle, since we only average 1.3, so an hour and 18 minutes average, over 3,300 flights. That's the more impressive part.
Yeah.
When you talk to the heavy guys, at least.
And all over the world, as I understand, as we'll get to in a moment. And let's actually go there now. So, dude, where are you from? What did you do? And what are you doing now?
So from all over. My dad also was in the Air Force, 27 years, B-52s in Vietnam. We lived all over the U.S., 12 different states. And then I joined the Air Force. Multiple different states, live in Germany, live in England, live in Hawaii, which is fantastic. Best state ever. Where Stretch and I had a second tour together, which is amazing. From the U.S. of A., went through University of Nebraska because my dad was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base, which was back in the day SAC headquarters, Strategic Air Command headquarters. So stayed in Nebraska, Cornhusker for college, electrical engineer, worked for Boeing as an engineer, ironically designing flight controls for drones back in the 80s, not realizing I'm putting myself out of a job. So got an OTS slots, joined the Air Force, and went to pilot training, got the F-15, off to Germany, and then to England, and then after 10 years in active duty, joined the Missouri Air National Guard.
Wow. Is that all you flew, or did you take a break and go fly the F-117 or
So
F-16
interesting. A lot of my mentors flew 7, 8 different types of aircraft. I was boring and only learned how to fly one, fly the F-15 Eagle for 30 years straight.
Did he get good at it in that time stretch?
He's pretty doggone good.
Still working.
Yeah, we're still working on it, but he's pretty doggone good.
Oh, man.
Wow, 30 years straight. That's a significant accomplishment. I flew it 20 straight years, and that's pretty cool.
How did the Air Force not get their mitts on you guys and go make you do something in the Pentagon, for heaven's sakes?
Because I joined the Guard. Had some choice in my decisions and where I would be assigned.
All right.
And anything that had an Eagle to fly on the side.
I'm jealous. I should have done that. All right, guys. Well, we can certainly bounce around. I think the F-15 is an awesome airplane. I'm really looking forward to learning more about it. I'm sad to say I never fought an Eagle. I fought a Strike Eagle once, and that worked out okay for me. But I really want to learn about this. And to me, this is always King Kong. I mean, Stretch, you and I talked about the F-22, but that's a relative newcomer to me anyway. But the F-15, I mean, it's been dominating for 30 years more, right?
Oh, yes. And still to this day, you know, when I do my aggressor role out at Nellis, I just still cannot figure out a way to get away from the F-15. I've tried.
Fight's on, you guys are dead. You know?
So the number, it's 45 years. So 1974 was the first squadron that was opened, 45 years ago. So the F-15, interesting of how you started your podcast through the muscle cars. Well, the F-15 was designed as the muscle car of the air.
Yeah. And I think it does that quite well. All right, well, let's do that. Let's start at the beginning. How did it come to be, and what was it designed to do?
So the F-15 was absolutely designed for air dominance. So McDonnell Douglas came up with a plan based on requirements from the Air Force on, hey, how can we dominate the skies, all altitudes, and truly perfect the air-to-air war? And they designed the F-15. What's interesting is the radar for the F-15 was designed first because they said to win this war in the air, we have to be able to detect other planes. So basic engineering, the bigger the dish of a radar, the further you can see. So they built a 3-foot, basically a yard wide diameter dish of radar.
Which then specified the width of your fuselage,
exactly.
Right?
So they go, okay, here's the cone for the plane. What needs to support that? So they built a tennis court behind it, which is about the size of the 15, is a tennis court to support that radar.
Wow.
And they start off in the 70s, and the muscle car analogy is they wanted to have all the records, and they gained all the records. So the time to climb record, the fastest of any plane ever built at the time in the 70s, to climb up in the 90s over 100,000 feet, actually he got by the time he pulled out, so to speak. So they had it chained down. So that's a video to go look for, is the chain down F-15 for the Streak Eagle.
Yeah, no paint, right?
Unbelievable, yeah. So they designed it to do all altitude air-to-air only. So air-to-air missiles, air-to-air gun, Gatling gun, which is on many of the aircraft fighters. But it was designed to be an all-altitude, all-weather fighter, be able to launch quickly for air defense, which still happens in the U.S. We can talk about that later, about the air defense capability.
Yeah. And I would argue does all those things quite well.
It's exceptional. It's amazing how, just like your iPhone has morphed from the first edition, or talk about flip phones to what we have now with the current technology, is the F-15 is not the same plane 30 years later after flying it in the late 80s to flying it now. It looks the same structure, but the avionics, the capabilities, the weapons, the computer systems, everything is completely revamped to be a completely different, capable plane, even though its mission has not changed. It's still air dominance.
Yeah. And of course, the radar has changed on some of the later variants with the active scanned. So there's a lot of improvements, as you would expect, over 45 years, but still basic same airframe, I guess.
It is basic same airframe, yes. They're doing some modifications to the support structure because the aircraft was not designed to fly for 45 years. So pulling 9 Gs or sometimes more than 9 Gs, which is 9 forces times the gravity that we sit. We're sitting here at one force of one gravity. So 9 Gs over and over and over is just the whole principle of any type of metal you bend over and over. So it's going to start to break. So it's the same airframe, but the weapons are different. The system is different. The capabilities for the pilot, helmet mounted sights, like you said, the electronically scanned radar, the missile systems are all different, including new engines, sort of newer than the 70 models, but everything's been upgraded, but it looks the same.
I think that's a true testament to the design of the aircraft. It's an outstanding weapons platform. When they built the airplane, the wing was designed for 5 Gs at 30,000 feet sustained. And so that has carried that platform throughout time. And so the flight controls are good on the airplane. It's got a control augmentation system. And like Spiderman said, the engines have been upgraded and are substantially more reliable than when the airplane first came out.
Are they more powerful?
A little bit, but it's mainly because of the digital system. So it's a digital control now to make sure the engine is operating at optimal level. So because of the digital aspect, it can be operated closer to 100% than you could with an analog system. So more power based on the digital, more than the actual thrust of the power
So it's more of a fine tuning than it is of like in the Hornet around the Block 15, they came out with the EPE, Enhanced Performance Engines, and it was 2,000 extra pounds of thrust in afterburner, for example. But it sounds like yours is more efficiency, more fine tuning.
It sure is.
Up a carburetor almost.
Yeah, the Pratt & Whitney engine is what they have. The 100s were analog. When you select afterburners, at a certain percentage of times, the afterburner wouldn't light. So with a digital system, it's routine. You can light or unlight the candle, as we call it, over and over, and it's very low.
You don't have to think much about your left hand in the Eagle anymore.
All right. Anymore. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting
anymore.
point.
You used to have to.
Okay.
You used to be very cautious when you'd go into afterburner. We'd just barely put them over the hump, get them, make sure the nozzles would move, and then slowly work the afterburners in. Now you can just go right from 80% right to full afterburner.
Nice.
It will light and work fine.
All right. So for air-to-air, is there a bread and butter mission for the Eagle? I mean, you got OCA, DCA. There's a lot of different variants, but what is maybe the heart of the envelope for this thing, or maybe what did you guys enjoy most doing in it?
Yeah, F-15 is made for air dominance. And so OCA, DCA, so OCA being offensive counter-air,
Right.
to bring our forces to the enemy, protect those forces is one of the primary designs, and we do it extremely well. I can talk about that later with some Desert Storm stories. For the DCA, defensive counter-air, the F-15, I still today think is the best aircraft we have for air defense because of its ability to scramble, alert launch. Just like the firemen's, you get the horn go off, how fast you can get airborne. F-15 can get airborne in 3 minutes.
Wow.
Unlike any other plane that we have on air defense. And we can be ready to go and ready to shoot down anybody who's penetrating our airspace on a defensive posture in less than 3 minutes. And
Cool. Now, let's talk about the variants, and I'll caveat this by saying you guys have schooled me already off tape that the Strike Eagle is a total different animal, and I had at one point thought about doing a combined episode like I did the Hornet, Super Hornet, but those are pretty much the same airplane with some differences. But let's talk A through D. And then my hope is I can find a guest. I had one, and he hasn't answered my emails lately, but I'll have him listen to this, and then we can fill in another episode on the Strike Eagle. But for A through D, what are some of the differences? Like the Hornet, I guess, the B and the D are the two-seaters. But what's the difference, let's say, between the AB and the CD?
Well, as funny as you say, since McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing, makes both planes, the Hornet and the Eagle, it's exactly the same nomenclature. So the B and the D are just two-seat trainers. We'll take those up for motivation and for dignitaries and all the rest of it to give awareness, and mainly for training, though. The A and the C are single-seat fighter variations designed for combat. The A and the B were the old school original designs back in the 70s that were finally replaced by the C and D. So we had an overlap for a while, and the National Guard flew the A's and B's mainly for a number of years. So literally 20 years ago, the mid-90s, all the A's and B's are gone. They're in the boneyard. So it's C and D, single-seat C, two-seat D models.
There was a difference in fuel as well.
About 2,000 pounds?
About 2,000 pounds. So internal on the A model was about 11,000 pounds, and I think the C is about 13,500 or so. So it's about 2,000 pounds of fuel difference. The other thing that the reason the A didn't stay around was it wasn't modifiable to the current avionics suite. So they had to upgrade the avionics suite to keep the capability. It just didn't have the capability to do that.
Gotcha. Now, let me ask you guys this. In the air wings that deploy on aircraft carriers, there will always be a two-seat squadron, and that is because the Navy believes there are certain missions that are better suited to a crew of two. In the Air Force, you said training. So is there not a need for a two-seat D to go out and do? I mean, even our Fs and Ds in the Navy and the Marine Corps do air-to-air. But is there no deployable D squadrons for Eagles?
Well, there's no such thing as that. So now we're getting to the E model strike mission where they're all two-seaters. So the only purpose of the D model, same thing with the B, is just to retrain someone who's been out of the cockpit long enough that they're not sure if they can land, so they have an instructor in the back.
Gotcha.
Maybe the first time they've refueled in 6 years, so hey, let's get an instructor in the back seat. But there is no mission for the backseater at all. In fact, there's no ability to control the avionics, and most of the avionics in the back seat don't even exist, so there's not the awareness. So literally the only purpose of that back seat in the D is to be the safety observer, and let me show you, I'll show you, and then you do it.
Yeah. Now, most operational squadrons would only have maybe one, maybe two D models.
For the reason Spidey just said.
Exactly. So the flying training units or the fleet replacement squadrons, when I was at the 2nd Fighter Squadron, I think we had 8 two-seaters.
And you could soloize the back seat probably and fly it like a C if you needed to.
It's solo most of the time, unfortunately, because half the reason for that back seat is for incentive flights. For the maintenance folks and everybody else in the base who does great things. So the superior performers would get on the list to fly in the back seat, and we would love to fly them.
Oh, I'm sure.
But that's about what it was for. No one.
I really enjoyed doing incentive flights in the Eagle. It was fun.
And the flights
were fun.
Docs, absolutely, so they could understand what we go through physically, so they could better help us when we have physiological needs.
They get up there as well.
Yep.
And then, like you said, the C model has been upgraded since, with a handful of them have the AESA, as we call it, the joint helmet. Did the A and B, like our F-18 A and B did not have, of course the B was just a trainer also, but the A did not have AMRAAM. Did your F-15As have AMRAAM, do you recall?
So the A models did not have AMRAAM.
Okay, but they're
so
gone
that was
now.
one. They are gone, and
Okay.
so that's actually what we flew in our squadron from Bitburg is A models from Incirlik, Turkey, over Iraq for Desert Storm, and we did not have AMRAAMs. In fact, no one had AMRAAMs yet. They came out the year afterwards.
Yeah.
But so no, the A models were not upgradable to that. And the other piece of the puzzle for the upgrades is the software for the C models. They had the computer-driven, basically it's a TV screen.
Okay.
So we have a full monitor.
Multifunction display.
There you go. That allows us to do upgrades and to change the software very easily.
And then, again, not talking about the E, are there any other variants? I know in the news I've heard the F-15X recently. I don't know what's going on with
That's
that.
a future option.
Okay.
So they're looking at that. In fact, there's funding to actually procure the F-15X, and they're not sure if it's going to be the EX or the X, or I'm not sure what the nomenclature could be, but it's basically same builder, Boeing, with a two-seat model, but more focused on the air-to-air, but the option to do air-to-ground as well, so I understand.
That's insane.
All right, so like an F-18 in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay, and then who all flies this thing besides the U.S. Air Force?
So there are multiple countries. I'll probably miss some. It's Singapore, South Korea. We've got Saudi Arabia. I'm sure I missed a couple besides
Japan, I think.
Israel.
Japan,
Israel.
Israel, yeah.
I did a 1-year remote tour helping the Saudis set up their flying training unit there in 1994. Very crazy assignment.
Should we leave it at that?
Yes. Not recommended, but crazy.
You didn't log
I survived, and I'm really happy about
Did you log any green ink?
No.
Well, you're not far from the action in that country. That's kind of crazy.
Yes.
A whole different discussion.
That's
perhaps.
every flight.
Every flight.
Really? All right. You're always carrying.
So I was down at Kamis Maché. We were 90 miles from the Yemeni border, and the Saudis would call them border disputes. There was a lot going on down there, and I'm like, okay, I'm an American. I need to stay well north of that border.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, do you guys also use green ink in your logbooks? Is that an expression that you guys are familiar with now? Okay. In the Navy logbooks, if you do a combat or contingency flight, it goes in green, whereas night flying goes in red.
Just
NVGs
learned something
go in
new.
Blue. Yeah, all right.
Jello, you're educating us.
Yeah,
Thank
there
you.
you
I
go.
didn't know that.
All right.
I had no. When you said green ink, I'm like,
whatever. He
It
must know what
matches
he's
the
talking
Saudi
about.
flag for me. I don't know.
All right, fair enough. Let's see. We've been through what it was designed to do, what it's doing well, the variants. Looks. I mean, you said it's pretty big, huh? So about as big as a tennis court?
Well, it's about as big as a tennis court. If you overlay it, it's huge. It's one of the biggest fighters out there. The F-22 is very close to it, frankly.
All right.
But when it was designed in the 70s, definitely the biggest fighter ever. Much bigger than the same company that built the F-4, McDonnell Douglas. They built the F-15, totally different design. So almost as big as tennis court. As Stretch alluded, the wings are designed for 5G turn. So if anybody who's been in a roller coaster, the max G in the roller coaster is about 4. Most of them about 3.5 when you get to the, I feel squished level. So this plane was designed for 5Gs at 30,000 feet when the air is pretty thin. If you're at sea level, it can pull 9 without ripping the wings off. It's pulled 12 many times. It's amazing, the design of it. So that's not the point of this question, though. So with the camber of the wing, it can fly at multiple altitudes, and I forget what the question is. How do I get on that?
Why is it that big?
Well, so we go back to the radar, remember? So we start with that, the 1 yard, 1 meter.
That's right.
Diameter.
For the dish.
For the dish, right? And now part of that is 85% of the aircraft now, the F-15C models, are flying with phased array radars, the ESA. So the aircraft behind it, to fly high altitude with cambered wings, they go, hey, we need a couple engines, so we have not only backup, so we have more thrust, and we want to have firm control of this aircraft during dogfights, so that's where the 2 tails came from. So the tails are about 12 feet tall each. If you're standing on the ground, they're 18 feet from you at the top. So those tall tails, 2 of them with the big rudders, allow the aircraft at high AOA, so slow speeds, nose up high, to turn Not a pedal turn like the F-22, but you can do a significant yaw at speeds slower than you can take off.
Oh, wow.
So about half the speed you can take off, you can still fly this controllable with rudder and a little split throttle perhaps helps you a little bit, and do a significant yaw and make this thing turn into a helicopter of sorts, which makes it an incredible dogfight machine at slow speeds, but also because of the camber high altitude wing, it can fly high and fast speeds. So you can go from low altitude to high altitude, slow speed to high speeds in a very short amount of time because of how it's designed. So that's why it was built as it is, with two tails, two engines, big wing. The big wing provides low weight to the wing.
Right.
So you can fly at very high altitudes. So
And
we're
fast.
very comfortable in the mid 40s for sure. Mid 40s, which gets us a high Mach to help us basically slingshot the missiles that we're flying with
Better
further
kinematics.
distance. Absolutely.
Okay. So as I understand, one of the aircraft that Colonel Boyd was involved with his energy maneuverability stuff, of course, then along came other people that said, let's add a ladder and all these other impure things to it, which added to weight, but still a very good fighter. But let me take a step back. I mean, the three of us have no problem with this, but for the listener who maybe is not as familiar, an F-16 is pretty obvious. Single tail, very small, but an F-14, 15, and 18 have some similarities. So how do I tell the difference of an F-15 to the other two, apart from the markings for Navy, of course, which some promotional posters I've seen will screw that up and put Air Force on an F-18 aircraft silhouette. But tell me how to distinguish an F-15 from the other two.
It's tough at distance, so you have to get a little closer. So as you're getting closer, within a couple miles for sure, maybe within a mile to determine the difference. So the F-15 has straight vertical tails.
Right.
They are parallel to one another, and the engines are inside of those tails, very close together.
Okay.
So a lot of the differences are from the rear end of the plane as well as the front. So that's an example from the rear, because you compare that to the F-14, the engines are right under the tails. They're also straight and vertical, but they're a little wider stanced, and the engines are under the tails, so they're wider apart. So if you look at the two between, you can tell, hey, one has a gap between the engines. That's an F-14 versus a F-15. As opposed to the F-18, big differences because the tails are canted.
Right.
They're not parallel to one another. So the top end of each tail is further away than the base where it's attached to the aircraft. And the engines to the F-18 are even closer together than the F-15. So it's really tight engines, canted tail F-18, far apart engines, straight tails F-14, close engines, straight tails F-15. Other pieces of that, mainly now as we get to the straight tails, which really kind of is the harder part between the F-14 and F-15, now we get to the wings. So that's really where the big obvious difference is at any angle from the F-14 and F-15. F-14 wings are sweepable mechanically, but they can sweep forward like an F-111. So they're straight wing basically for takeoff and landing versus swept way back for, hey, I want to go fast. F-14, when it's swept back, is swept much, much further back than F-15, which is a fixed wing, doesn't move. It's just a slight angle, straight in the back. So there's many differences, but those are some. The intakes obviously are other things, but that gets into really detail where you're inside of about 4,000 feet when you're seeing the shape of the intakes, but I won't get into that.
Yeah, no problem. Just out of curiosity, so both you guys ended up in the airlines at one point or another. Was the F-15... like in my F-18, I had a limited to centerline thrust, even though there's two engines.
The F-15 was the same way.
Okay, I don't think
you had to get that removed, the centerline thrust restriction.
Yeah, I don't think the F-14 was, but I probably shouldn't say because
I think you're correct because they're so far apart.
Okay,
yes, they were.
So
that's exactly right.
All right. Spidey, I'm going to say it for you since you didn't, but I'll never know because I'll never be behind you in the F-15, right? All right. So I'll never see the engine.
I'm not saying that.
Not for long.
Not for long. You might be back there.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, speaking of that, we're going to get to armament and performance, but we already touched on it. So flying the thing pretty agile. I mean, again, when I think of an Eagle, I think of high, fast, hitting me right after fight's on at a long range. But if we get in the phone booth together, are you guys pretty capable there too? Again, I never had a chance to swirl with an Eagle, but my guess would be if I could get you slow in my Hornet, I might do okay, because the Hornet's really designed for that.
Well, so that's a good point. And to any fighter, aviator, he knows his threat, knows his adversary, and what their advantages are. So the F-18 Hornet, you're correct, with the forward-leading slats and the ability to really turn your nose all the way around at 70 knots is pretty amazing. So we can't go quite that slow and turn quite as fast as you. However, the F-15 was so well designed, it can do the high fast, as we talked about. It can do the scramble launches in 3 minutes. It can get up to 45,000 feet going Mach 1.5 in no time. Then it can do an intercept and slow down and do a dogfight, 9G turn, and get down to 70 knots and still maintain, if the pilot knows what he's doing, against the F-18 because of the thrust ability.
Yeah.
So we can out-thrust and out-climb you and still do split throttles and rudder. And if you're conscientious of the AOA that you're under, you can still maneuver the jet very easily at 80 knots.
Okay.
That's not where we'd like to be, but we can do the spiral staircases. We talked about it with the rudder full in at 35 AOA and keep going around for a while and then really quickly accelerate once we have the tanks off the jet and our clean jet. Seriously, we can accelerate very quickly and now get right back to 450 knots pulling 9Gs again. So that's the advantage of the Eagle, the combination of the power, the ability to accelerate, and the ability to fly high and fast, and also at any altitude and do turns like we talked about with the camber of the wings to pull 5Gs at 30,000 feet. Most aircraft can't do that. They have to be lower altitude. So our advantage is higher altitude. However, we can fly at all altitudes and do pretty well.
I got a story. So weapons school, probably Spiderman was on this ride with me. So I go all the way across the range on the Nellis range. I push from Student Gap and I sweep all the way across the range and I don't shoot anybody. So Spider-Man's looking at me right now with a chagrin on his face going, how can that be? And I'll describe the grade sheet later. So I go all the way across and I'm at Stonewall and there's a Hornet. I'm at 27,000 feet. I think he's at 29,000 feet entering the range. I didn't radar detect him. He didn't radar detect me. And it says if I look about 45 degrees left and 10 degrees high, he sets his wings on me and I set my wings on him at the same time and we start turning.
Nice.
So I merge with him and I have about 12,500 pounds of gas.
Oh.
So if the tanks are dry, so I go afterburner and we start turning. This fight goes up, it goes down, it goes single circle, and eventually there is a floor transition that happens because the floor for the fight, for the full up maneuvering was 14,000 feet. And I ease off in this fight. You're talking about getting your energy back. You're talking about if you can get me slow. So he had gotten me slow and he had tied me up for a long time. And I got back to about 400 to 420 knots. And he's down at 120 right at the floor, lots of alpha. And no kidding, I just outrate him around the turn, come around and take a gunshot. As I take that gunshot, I realize, because I had flown through my bingo fuel, which I should have not done. Okay, I finally get that gunshot and I come off, I pull it out of burners and I'm at 3.8 on the gas.
That's a lot of fuel burn in that one fight.
Oh my gosh, it was a fantastic fight. So anyway, long story short, I go back to the debrief and I'm like, this was a terrible ride for me. I'm like, I'm for sure going to bust this ride. So in the debrief, in the back of the room, I'm watching the ACMI and I'm just cringing watching this whole thing because I missed all of my sorting and targeting and it just was not good. I go, but then this Marine major in the back of the room yells, "Stop!"
Uh-oh.
I'm like, oh no.
That means he's got a shot, right?
No, he doesn't. But he goes, "Who's the Eagle right there? Who's that guy?" And I'm slumping in my seat, trying not to be seen. And I go, "It was me." He goes, "This was the greatest engagement I've ever been in ever. It was 4 minutes and I was bingo and it was awesome. Thank you." And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm busted this ride. So anyway, I think I got lucky and passed it. But going back to the point of, if you could get me slow, you have an advantage. If I could keep my speed up and keep your nose at bay, then I can have the advantage in the Eagle.
Well, and if you can get the pressure off you long enough, you can get your speed back. It takes me a long time to get my speed back in the F-18.
I'm trying to remember the numbers. I think when you unload at about 250, about 3 seconds later, you're getting 50 knots. And then about another 3 seconds, you're 100 knots.
Wow.
So about 5-6 seconds, you've gained 100 knots back.
The F-18 needs that.
On the proper acceleration profile.
That's
Those
impressive.
numbers match, Spidey? Close enough?
But
assuming optimum acceleration, and you got a little altitude.
It is important to differentiate, though, when you talk about you got to fight and dogfight one of the Strike Eagles. The Strike Eagles are completely differently configured,
Right.
and they're configured for air to ground, of
Yeah.
course.
Yep.
And so the drag of that F-15 is completely different because of everything they have hanging
That's
up.
right.
They've got targeting pods. They've got
a bigger canopy.
They've got conformal tanks. They're heavier jet. So the F-15 Strike Eagle, literally empty, no gas, no weapons on board, weighs the same as an F-15 C model full of gas.
Wow.
If you took those conformals off, that is a heck of a performing aircraft.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a lot to do with the targeting pods because they have so much drag.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right, let's move on to armament. And I guess we'll talk. You already said the M61. How many rounds?
M51A.
51?
It is 900.
Hold on. I'm going to call you on that one.
M61, sorry.
M61.
M61. Sorry, M61 Alpha. It was 940 rounds.
940, wow.
940
Okay.
rounds. So that is incredible that M61 has been on so many different aircraft.
Yep.
It was designed in the 50s, 100 bullets per second, which is still mind-boggling to me. So 940 rounds, so about 9.5 seconds worth of trigger squeeze, 2.5 degree up cant. And it's in the right wing root, right above the engine on the right side. So what's incredible is they've only upgraded the actual bullets a couple times since the aircraft's been flying. God, it's so incredible. So that was the start of it. When the F-15 was designed, it was designed to do all the air-to-air, high altitude, all that stuff we discussed. But armament, they just took what they already had from the F-4. So they really just transferred what the F-4 was carrying at the time, which were AIM-7s, 4 of those, which are radar-guided missiles. So the aircraft radar locks onto a target, holds onto the target, shoots the AIM-7, holds on the target until the AIM-7 actually impacts. And that's a radar-guided missile. So the 4 AIM-7s, the Great White, we call it, 500-pound air-to-air missile, which is amazing. And it succeeded. We took down 36 enemy aircraft in Desert Storm.
With Sparrows?
Yeah, with Sparrows.
It's quite a bit better record than the Sparrow had in Vietnam.
Absolutely. But same.
So they fixed things.
It was a different version of Sparrow. It was the Mike version. But anyway, AIM-7, same thing that the F-4s were flying in Vietnam. So kind of interesting that the weapons didn't change. And we flew AIM-9. So 4 Sparrows, AIM-7 Sparrows, and 4 AIM-9s. When I started in the late 80s, it was the AIM-9 Lima, which was not flare, didn't have any flare rejection capability. And then they transitioned very quickly, early 90s, to AIM-9 Mike, which had some flare rejection capability. So basically, it's a 4x4 load, all air-to-air weapons with the 4 AIM-7s, 4 AIM-9 Mikes.
Okay.
And then the M61 Alpha gun. So
We
that
were
was
letting you get by with that.
no, that was good. I don't know where that came from. I was thinking the P-51 earlier, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's where it came from my brain. So
Anyway, no problem.
that was the design. And through Desert Storm, that's what we carried. So there were no AMRAMs in Desert Storm. We had AIM-7s, and that's where all the takedowns were. There were a couple AIM-9 takedowns. So the 36 we got, there were a couple AIM-9s, but most of them were AIM-7 takedowns. It was literally the year after Desert Storm, and we're doing not only provide comfort, deny flight, and all the missions since Desert Storm. It was literally a year after that they started carrying AMRAMs. And there were a couple of AMRAM takedowns during that.
So there's a picture of an F-18 with 10 AMRAM on it. And of course, you'd never, I don't think, ever really do that. But how many, if you really wanted to load everything on the Eagle, how many total missiles can you carry?
8 missiles, and you can load them up. You can load them up with 8 AMRAMs.
Okay.
Now, so the AMRAM, unlike the AIM-7, which is the radar-guided, the AMRAM is semi-active, which is the radar still locks into a target, you shoot. Now, the missile itself has a F-16 radar, we call it, in it, and it can find the target on its own once it gets close enough.
You tell it where to go, and
then it's on its own.
We actually did talk about the
the semi-active capability. So you can actually load 8 AMRAMs if you wanted to, and so that's what gets into mission commander decisions and weapons availability. What's the loadout? What do we expect from the enemy, et cetera, on day flight, night flight, weather flight, et cetera, to whether you have all 8 AMRAMs. We have 7 AMRAMs and an AIM-9. Now we're carrying AIM-9Xs, which are
the joint helmet. So that's a
much
lethal
nicer,
combination.
Yeah, so it's fantastic front combination. So some of the upgrades we've gotten, like you said,
Okay.
the helmet 9X have completely changed the close range capability and lethality of the F-15.
Let me ask you this. The gun, did you guys ever, I know, not a pound for air to ground or whatever the expression is, but was there ever a part of the training or ready room discussions of using the gun in air to surface?
Absolutely, we have. In Desert Storm, we had 3 gun strafes. 2 guys took out a Candid on the ground.
That's a helicopter, right?
No, it's
a cargo, duh.
Like a C-141.
Yeah.
It's a Soviet C-141.
It's a Soviet C-1. So we had strafing during Desert Storm.
Okay.
And in fact, the 3-star general asked the crew when they landed, "Hey, have you guys trained to this?" They go, "Absolutely, sir." And they saluted smartly. So since then, we actually do train to it. Prior to that, that was their training.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually train to that. So we have, we call it Strafe. So we have Strafe missions in the F-15, even though we're air-to-air platform.
Right.
We want to be capable of mainly protecting troops on the ground if they need it. So we're kind of the last line of defense for CAS, close air support for the ground troops.
Right.
With 940 rounds, we have plenty of options to do multiple passes.
Yeah.
So we do practice that. Interestingly enough, we have no guided capability. So it's literally old school, put the thing on the thing, and that's hard to explain, but it's all literally just like going hunting. There's
iron sights almost.
It is an iron sight.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was the point of my question is for the last 20 plus years, I mean, there's really been no air-to-air threat, arguably. I mean, a little bit in Allied Force, a little bit in the Desert Storm initially, but since the mid-90s, it's been almost non-existent. And I guess what I'm asking is, what have you guys been doing? I don't mean that say that accusingly, but so much of what
sounds like we're doing a pretty good job.
No, well, if you're not spending 6 months in the Gulf, you're probably in better shape than I was. That's all my deployments were just go sit in the Gulf. But have you guys still deployed and used that as like, hey, this is what we can offer, or have you just not had to deploy? Or because a lot of the last 20 years has been, like you just said, Spidey, supporting the guy on the ground.
Absolutely. We do support the guy on the ground. So from the no-fly zones north and south of Iraq, which we did for decades.
Yeah, Operation Southern Watch and Northern Watch and all that. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So we are prepared to do air-to-ground safe if we need to. That is our last call because typically we have a force out there that we have air-to-ground expertise that can help. But if they're out of fuel or out of weapons, we can roll into that role. Our main role is to make sure that there are no other air threats to affect the folks on the ground. Since the Korean War, none of our ground troops have been attacked by another enemy aircraft.
The last time we lost somebody in combat was 15 April 1953 from an air attack.
Really?
And so our goal is to maintain that track record.
Mm-hmm.
So we will make sure there are no other air threats. And sometimes it's not from the country you expect because there are, quote, neutral nations that are not supposed to be participating that may be close proximity and threatening your troops. So we have been deployed. We continue to deploy, but our home station training is not to the threat of the ground ISIS shoot.
Right.
It's to the potential threat like we did in the Cold War. So what are the potential options of other countries that may threaten us? And we train to the highest potential threat. And it's only a potential. So we're not currently at threat on paper or otherwise, but we are prepared to take on any threat that happens to affect this nation from the globe.
I think one other mission that's really important that needs to be stressed here is Eagles sit in Homeland Defense.
Right. Noble Eagle.
24/7, 365. It's a no-fail mission.
Yeah.
And Eagles are doing that day in, day out with the Air National Guard.
Is there any politics, though, on the pure air-to-air? I mean, I love it. I think it's necessary, and I think there's some drawback in multi-purpose aircraft, but that seems to be de rigueur, right? I don't know if it speaks French, but that's the flavor of the day or whatever, is to have an aircraft that does it all. Is there any politicking or anything else that comes with the F-15 as just being air-to-air? I mean, again, I feel like I'm playing the bad guy here, but
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. There are politics because, I mean, everyone wants the biggest bang for the buck, of course. So if there's not a current need for a certain capability, we still want to use that aircraft for a different capability. So that's where multi-role comes into play. The fact that 1953 was the last time someone U.S. force was attacked from an enemy aircraft is a big deal. And that's the part that we need to make sure it doesn't get lost in the fray of, hey, let's save a buck here and there to make multi-role. We need expertise and we need specialists, and that's what we are. We're specialists. We are the infantry, if you will, in the air.
Right.
We are out there in the front. We take the spears and we throw the spears, but there's no one in between us and the enemy. So to have that capability, and anyone who's been in any hand-to-hand combat, which is kind of what we're designed to do in the air, as we are close dogfights capable, you can't do that well if you don't train to that solely.
Using that example, you're a lot like everyone that was on the battlefield back in the way back ages, right? I mean, you're the long archers, you're the spear guys, and then you're the dudes that are fighting it out hand to hand, and you're doing it all.
That is it. It's like the British when they lined up the
Redcoats.
Seriously, they all lined up. That's exactly what we do. We call it the Eagle Wall, and we line them up, and we hope they see that we're coming because they better be running.
Awesome. All right, next up is performance. I think we've already touched on it. 9Gs. Streak Eagle went up pretty high pretty quickly. But what have you guys seen as far as speed and, let's say, altitude?
We're supposed to stay below 50,000 feet.
Okay.
And not because of the capability of the plane, because of the lack of pressure, physiological. Right. So you're supposed to, and it's for our own safety, have a pressure suit if you go above 50,000 feet. Because if you lose rapid decompression above 50,000, you can have some serious long-term consequences. Yes. So we're supposed to be limited to 50.
Off the record,
I've been to 55. That's about it. Yeah. And that's a pretty lightweight, frankly, aircraft. But you can kind of eke your way up as you get lower fuel weight.
Right.
And Streak Eagle went up to 96. He was supposed to pull out, so to speak, there, and he got up to 100 and some, over 100,000 before it, because the molecules are so far apart. He's pulling on the stick, but nothing's happening. So basically, he just kind of fell out of the sky, which is interesting.
Well, I trust he was wearing a pressure suit.
He certainly was. Okay. He certainly was.
Fair enough. What have you seen on the Mach meter?
I haven't seen as high as some of the guys who do the FCFs.
Post-maintenance flights.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're designed to go fast. So they get up to about 50 and they ramp down. And I've talked to guys who go up to Mach 2. I've personally seen about Mach 1.6.
Okay.
Definitely well over 1,000 miles an hour, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. So about 1,500 miles an hour, actually. So it's fast up high. It's fast down low, but it's bumpy because of the light wing load.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting.
How about you, Stretch?
1.8 Mach, 8 missiles, 3 bags.
Wow.
I oversped the tank.
No. That's amazing.
Sure 1.8, right? 1.5 is the limit on the tank.
How'd you get that fast?
Just locked my left hand. It was 220 motors, and I was coming back from a combat mission. I go, I'm going to see how fast we can go.
Incredible.
It will go fast. The one thing I did notice is when I got to about 1.4, I got a little extra thrust out of the engines, and it went right to 1.8. And it was solid 1.8. I was cruising at 1.8 for probably 70 miles.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So basically, you're going faster than the sun travels. So the sun, it's not the sun, it's basically the rotation of the Earth is about 900 miles an hour. So you're going twice that fast. That's amazing.
That's an interesting comparison.
So the other piece about the G limitations is there are no limitations other than ripping the wings off. So the F-15 is all analog. It's all decided by the pilot. How hard you want to pull on the stick, how fast, what your altitude is. You have to assess all of that. So there's no limiter is the point. So unlike the computer-generated planes like the F-16 where you just pull and it gives you 9 Gs, maybe 9.2, it can, but it won't let you break the wings off. The F-15 is not like that. So I know personally individuals who have pulled 12 Gs in the F-15 up to 14 and still survived. The plane survived and the pilot survived.
It wasn't reusable.
There was
the airplane wasn't?
The airplane was not reusable.
Not when it get to 14.
Not at 14 Gs. 13 and a half. I remember one at 13 and a half, and a kid avoided the water at Tyndall and survived. And it was really low.
That's a good trade-off.
Yeah, he survived, and we came back, and they go put that one on out in front of the base wing headquarters, and it's still sitting there.
Did it come back with a little more dihedral than it left with?
It did.
Jeez.
But it survived, and it saved that kid. So that's a good thing.
All right.
So the bottom line is you have to finesse this plane. So when we fight, we really have to be conscientious of our altitude and our speed before we move the stick at all, because it's very fine line between a 90% of maximum, 9 Gs, versus 110%.
Right.
ripping the wings off. So it's incredible how much of a finesse, and that's why the experience is so important in the F-15, unlike other planes that have a digital
forgiving.
F-18,
there is a regime where your maximum G available decreases. If I'm remembering right, it's like 0.92 Mach to 1.1 Mach. In that regime, because the center of lift changes on the wing, so it changes where it reacts on the wing, and therefore you have less G available. So it's very easy to over G in the transonic regime.
Gotcha. Okay, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to pause the interview there because that's all the time we have for this episode. BS, before we sign off for now, I wanted to ask you real quickly about the two-seat Eagles. Do you have any at your unit? And how would you compare, based on what Spidey and Stretch were talking about, how would you compare the Air Force, or in your case, the Air National Guard, how they use two-seaters compared to the Navy and the Marine Corps?
We have one currently flying now. I think we had another one that we sent to test. They needed an extra airframe. So we had two. We have one now. And really, we use the back seat kind of for incentive rides for the maintenance folks to get up there. I took a bunch of back seats when I first showed up to the unit. I wasn't qualified to fly yet, so I just jumped in the back and kind of listened to how things were done and just watched how things were done in the Eagle, which is pretty great. But just like the Hornet, it flies just the same almost as a single seat. It has a little bit less gas, just like a Hornet would, a two-seat Hornet would.
Right.
But really, it's imperceptible. So it's a great airplane.
Cool. All right, buddy. Well, thanks for being part of this. Can you stick around for part 2 next week?
You bet.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for this week then. We'll catch you back here in about 10 days for part 2 of the F-15 Eagle here in F-15 month. And until then, we'll see you next time.